shows the wooden figurine and the tape measure. If you could show that, yeah. So on a given day, I have two objects, and of course they're different as they can be in case you get a lousy description or whatever. So on a given day, there's a couple of objects I picked out, and I labeled the one to myself. I labeled the one on the left, mark it up. The one on the right, mark it down. But they have no idea what my objects are.
Right.
So the next day, if you get the following slide.
That's the last slide.
Do you have the following slide?
I have a previous slide.
Yeah.
Is that it? Is that what you're looking for?
That's it, okay. And so I had 7 viewers, and on this particular day, 5 of them didn't turn out much. But one of the viewers said, I've got something all squirreled up in a can, all wound around, and I hear the words 1, 2, 3 said rhythmically.
Tape measure.
Yeah. The second guy, same thing, cans, all something all around it. So that's what I go with.
Interesting.
Anyway, make a long story short, 30 days in the market, we made $260,000 for the investor. We got our 10%, which is $26,000, so you got a bit of a bonus there for the school.
Why didn't you guys keep going and get rich?
Well, that I know. Everybody asked me that. The truth of the matter, it was almost a 24-hour-a-day job to do this. And meanwhile, we're back over at the lab training Army intelligence remote viewers how to remote view. So
Clearly, that wasn't your ambition. Your
That just
ambition
wasn't
was
my
not to
ambition,
get rich.
yeah.
But you proved your point.
I proved my point. So
Now, when going into the future, you're reasonably certain that this is a real phenomenon. Do you ever get access to these materials that you were discussing earlier? Have you ever seen anything?
yes, I have. One sample I can talk about is
Are there things you can't talk about?
there are things I can't talk about, right? But there's one sample I can talk about, which you could put up on the screen. That would be that.
This
layer.
right here? It's right here?
Yeah, right. It turns out that an Army person said that his grandfather had been involved in picking up debris from the Roswell crash, and so he sent it. Of all places, he sent it to Art Bell of the radio podcast, the great Art Bell. So Art Bell turned it over to Linda Howe. Linda. So she's got it, and so she said she'd make it available, and so on. So about this time, I had already had my viewpoint shifted, as I say, by Edward Teller about we should have more openness going on. And so, in fact, Tom DeLonge came along and, the punk rock Bleak 182, and said, we should be, by the way, this is before even things came out in the New York Times in December 2017. He says, I've been talking to people at some aerospace corporations, and they're saying how hard it is to get students to do their engineering and come to work for us. And so he said, well, if there's anything to, quote, the UFO area, maybe you could generate some interest that way. And so, long story short, he got Jim Simovan, now retired high-level person at CIA, got me.
Keep that up, Dave.
And so, so anyway, we started To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. And so we were part of what was behind helping Leslie Kean get that story out in the New York Times to break out that something was really going on behind the scenes.
Back to this material.
So anyway, on this material,
layered.
she came up with this material.
How big is this? So we're looking at?
Oh, it's about this big.
So 4 inches, something like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty big. And so it's got all these layers. So on the one hand, you could say, well, this is just a guy sending in some stuff. There's no chain of custody.
Right.
You don't know if he's a fraud making it up or whatever. But anyway, it turned out those are layers of titanium and bismuth. So anyway, we Tom DeLonge got a hold of a copy, and so we said, okay, we're gonna do everything we can to nail this down. So we actually set up a contract with an Army office, and then they arranged for ARROW, the All Domain Anomalies Resolution Office, to consider taking this seriously. And so they arranged that this could be analyzed by Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And so we provided this to them to analyze. Okay.
And what were the results?
Well, the results were that there's no obvious proof that it comes from out of our solar system, because there are various isotopes that would be different if it came from some other solar system. So that would be the first thing you'd look for to say, oh, this really is ET. So that didn't wash. The second part, though, was a little more interesting, and that is these layers of magnesium and bismuth, those are the size of a human hair, some of those layers. And they said, well, we can't find any evidence in the history of development of materials like that, and can't even imagine why anybody want to make it. So it's an anomaly. So no proof that it's ET. But one of the things we did do, he says, okay, well, how hard is it to make something like this? And so we got an aerospace corporation to say, can you bond bismuth and magnesium together, sort of like what we see in this sample. Well, they got 2 layers bonded, cost them over $1 million, broke down their instruments to do it. So it's still basically a mystery. So we got to read the report. It was not totally provided to the public. But
So
anyway,
is this about a 1/4 inch thick? Is that what we're looking at here?
yeah. It's about
So
like
how many
that.
layers did they estimate?
I think we had, it might have been 18, something like that. We could probably count them. So anyway, so that's a possible example, but no conclusion we come
So
to.
this is
definitively.
something that is of terrestrial origin in terms of materials when you measure the isotopes, but it's of a construction method that's not currently available.
That is a perfect description of the situation. And by the way, it certainly wasn't available back in the 40s and 50s
Right.
when it supposedly was found.
Supposedly, that's the problem.
Yeah,
So when was
supposedly.
this was analyzed in what year?
Well, analyses started taking place by Linda Howe at other laboratories, I think in the 2000s, and we got
As
hold
you
of
go
we,
back.
Yeah, we got it. I don't know, maybe 2020, something like that. So
But whoever, if the chain
we
of
got it
custody is accurate,
We got it analyzed only a couple years ago.
but if the chain of custody is accurate, it goes back far enough where this is impossible.
Right. And seemingly, given the effort that the Aerospace Corporation put in, they can't even manufacture this today
Right.
in that level. So
This Roswell crash is the big one, right? That's the one that everybody knows about, and it was in 1947 in Roswell, New
Right.
Mexico, and the wreckage was flown in 2 separate planes to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is unusual in and of itself. And the idea was that it's flown in 2 planes just in case one goes down, that this stuff is so
Right.
important that we have to analyze it.
that's correct.
What do you think that was?
I think it was a true non-human intelligence craft that crashed. We've talked to one of my colleagues, Eric Davis, is one of my senior scientific advisors. He interviewed General Exxon, who had been head of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and so on, and also DuBose. So he's interviewed a couple of people that were involved back in those days, and they say it was a real deal, that this was a real unidentifiable crash, and these materials were really from out someplace.
And what did they say was done with the wreckage?
That had been taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for analysis.
And did anything come out of that analysis?
Not that the public would hear about,
Not that you can disclose.
not that I could disclose.
That's where it gets frustrating. So there was...
Well, it gets frustrating even for, the compartmentalization in this area is really obscene. So you can have people sitting at this desk and someone else sitting in that chair, and
They don't have access.
I can't tell him what I'm working on. He can't tell me what he's working on. And so that's our going forward with this is very, very slow and not opportune, I would have to say. And of course, we have data. Can't go into detail. But we have data about crashes in other countries. So it's really clear that we're not the only ones on the planet. So that's something to be concerned about because, for example, here we have our capitalistic competition, aerospace corporations, electronics corporations, all being very hushed up and not sharing
Which
anything.
stifles innovation.
Stifles innovation. Meanwhile, in China, you put all the labs on something like this and say, and by the way, don't say anything outside that you're not supposed to say, or you're done. And so the competition that potentially could be
They're
happening.
unhindered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's part of what's behind our not revealing what we've learned, because there might be some aspect that we've learned which in principle you'd think, well, you could reveal, but it might be the missing piece that some potential adversary said, oh, that's what we've been missing.
Right.
So even though generally speaking I'm of the feeling that there should be more disclosure, I'm also very tight on anything that could be potentially helpful to an adversary in this area. We're not going to reveal. That would be a mistake. So
How do these things keep crashing if they're so good? If they can get here from somewhere else, why do they slam into the desert?
Some of them have just been left in the desert, not crashed.
Some of them.
Some
Yeah.
of them have just.
I talked to Diana Pasulko about this,
Oh, okay.
and she refers to them as donations. She said that's how they
Donations,
were
yeah.
described to her.
Yeah. So in fact, maybe some of them are donations to help us accelerate our forward motion, or maybe they donate something here, something in China, something in Russia, and see who is best at moving forward,
Right.
just as part of their ISR evaluation of us. I mean, let's face it. We've had, as is known in the public, we've had UFOs come over our missile silos one at Malmstrom Air Force Base that Salas has talked about, Bob Salas, they turned off all of our missiles. So there's no way it could be launched. In Russia, there's even a worse case. They started the launch sequence in Russia at a missile silo, nuclear missile silo. And the people at the location could not stop it, could not turn it off. So they thought, World War III is about to stop. Fortunately, it was turned off. So anyway, you've got two things.
So whoever was doing that, whoever was manipulating it, turned it off.
That's right.
Do
So
you
there's a
think
big
it's-
question. There are two ways to look at that.
Right.
They're friendly and benign, and they just want us to know that if we get too frisky down here and think about having a nuclear war, they can stop it. Or they might not be benign, and the Armada is on its way, and they just want to test that they can stop our use of nuclear weapons against them. So it's, from a security standpoint and from a DoD standpoint, from an intelligence community standpoint, you always have to have the worst scenario in your mind
Right.
and see where you go.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine from a security standpoint, it's a nightmare because you're not secure at all. If something can fly over your airspace and you can't do anything about it, and it can shut down your missiles or turn them on, you're in a very strange situation
Mother.
That's true.
where you're completely helpless, dependent upon the whim of these beings
Exactly.
or whatever their mandate is, whatever they're trying to do.
Right.
What do you think they're trying to do
If
here?
you're here, aliens, well, thank you for everything.
I
You
have
help us
thoughts
and
going in
please
many
don't kill
directions
us
in answer to that
I hope
question.
to meet people like that.
All the way from,
Be amazed
well, they
at
seeded
your
us here, millennia
Right.
ago, and they're just seeing how their Petri dish is doing.
Human
Or-
beings are the product of accelerated evolution.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. But, I mean, it's really hard to know. I mean, it may be that we're a very special planet because we have all this water, which, generally
What?
speaking, is kind
Okay,
of
can I do that?
rare. So, maybe they'd like to slowly build up a connection with us so that they could take advantage of direct access to some of our resources. Don't know. By and large, interactions
Shit, I don't know what to say.
have not been what you might call negative. I mean, even when we shoot missiles at them or whatever. But there were a series of events in Caleres Island in Brazil back in the 80s, I think it was. And as part of our program, we investigated that in some detail, where over some long period, like weeks, and the Brazilian Air Force got involved. They got 1,000 hours of film, and they put a big Air Force group down there. And the UFOs were coming over and sending out beams that were actually harming people. That's our one example that stands out of there being apparent episodes where UFOs, there's no way to interpret it but as negative. So that makes you wonder, well, maybe there's just one particular
I
group
deserve
of
to lose
Right.
that one.
euphonauts that are negatively disposed, but the rest of them are okay. So anyway, that's...
Well, they're probably
yeah.
just like humans in that regard, right? There's humans that are involved in scientific research expeditions. And they go there not looking to do any harm at all. And then there's humans that will go into an area where they're looking to extract resources. And all they want to do is do that. And anything that gets in their way, is casualties.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot. I mean, it's still a big area that needs a lot of look-see. And interestingly enough, even though this has been a tinfoil hat crowd kind of thing up until around 2017 when that New York Times story came out, suddenly that really made a difference because the people that were coming on board that there's something real here were people like Senator Harry Reid and other senators and so on. And so that's sort of broken open that, okay, there really is something here. And so as a result of that, that's how some of these programs have gotten pushed
Greenlit.
forward and reignited.
How many of these crashed crafts do you estimate there are that human beings have recovered?
More than 10.
More than 10.
More than 10.
How many of them are in possession of people in the United States?
I meant more than 10 in possession of the United States.
What about worldwide?
Worldwide,
Do we have any data on that?
we have data, but it's classified. There's no way to really talk about it.
But so there's more, though. You
Yeah,
could safely say it's not just the ones in the United States.
Not just the ones in the United States. And these...
Are they equally distributed?
I actually, I don't know for sure in terms of data. I mean, we have our best data, of course, on our own retrievals.
But more
It's
than
hard to
10
say.
retrieved in the United States.
More than 10 retrievals.
What is your take on Bob Lazar?
Well, we looked into the Bob Lazar story, and but only from a certain relatively superficial level. Looked at we found out what his clearance levels supposedly were, and so on, which came back saying it was not high enough to be doing what he says he was doing. On the other hand, it may just simply be, yeah, it was better than that, but we didn't have the access to see that. So when I hear his physics descriptions, it's a puzzle. It seems not exactly as I would anticipate might be the technology behind the craft, but I can't absolutely write him off. So it's an enigma, and I don't have any hard data to prove one way or the other. So it's I know you've talked to him. And,
Yeah. It's a fascinating puzzle.
It is a fascinating puzzle.
Because that would be the place, S4 would be the place where they would do that kind of work. I mean, if you wanted to do something like that in complete privacy and secrecy, you do it in the middle of the Nevada desert, very protected.
That's true. Right?
Outside of Area 51.
So even when people that have high clearances go and say, well, tell me about this, what's behind this? Who knows? If it's a special access program, an SAP, it might be, say, no, we're going to tell you that he didn't do anything of significance here. In fact, he might have done something of significance. There's just no way of telling from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the actual generator, the thing that powers the craft that Lazar talked about, what was your take on that? This idea that it was element 115, that when it encounters high radiation, it has some sort of an anti-gravitational effect, some warp effect.
Well, there are two aspects. One is, what is the material or mechanisms that generate the effects? And then the other is, are the effects being described reasonable descriptions of the kind of effects you think are associated with such craft? On the element 115, as you know, in the general scientific community, we've seen element 115, but it's very short-lived. So it's hard to evaluate that, and at this point, there's no evidence that's it.
So it was we should explain to people, it was theoretical at one point until they detected it using, was it a Large Hadron Collider or another particle collider?
Right now, I think it was a particle collider in Soviet Union or in Russia.
And it's very short-lasting.
Yeah.
But the idea is that what Lazar was in possession of, or what the craft was powered by, was some sort of a stable version of element 115.
That's what he says. So, in general, it was known that and predicted that there was an island of stability, as we call it, on some of these higher elements in the periodic table that are beyond uranium and so on. But really, no data predicted as to what their lifetimes would be. And so element 115 is in that bunch, and when he first discussed it, it hadn't been seen yet.
Or this is way back in 1989.
Way back, that's right. But eventually, that element was detected, although the version of it that was detected had a very short lifetime. But of course, there may be some other isotope of that element that could have a long lifetime. Who knows? So it's just hard to evaluate. So it sits in my gray box, as I say. But his description of the anti-gravity effects and so on, that's an area that is well described as what you might expect. As it turns out, in that series of 38 papers, one of my own papers that I provided was one called Space-Time Metric Engineering. And when the pilots came to me and said, drops down, takes off, right angle turn at Mach 10, this is way beyond the physics. And as I said earlier, I think it's not beyond our physics, beyond our engineering. But what I did on the physics level was all of our electronics that we have here, for example, this microphone, the recording that you're making, and so on, that's all based on electromagnetic kinds of technologies, all of which come out of Maxwell's equations. Maxwell's equations, Clerk Maxwell way back in the 1800s, developed the equations for electromagnetism, and basically any kind of electromagnetic device, you name it, Wi-Fi, whatever, can be traced back to his equations. So what I said to myself was, okay, we have these apparent craft operating with this unbelievable kinds of activity. Is there any way to account for that in our physics? Well, it turns out. So what I did,
I took
a sheet of paper, and the left-hand side of the paper, I wrote down all the weird effects that have been claimed. Right angle turn at Mach 10. I got close to the craft, and suddenly it wasn't the same size as it seemed to be when I was further away. It was a certain color, but when I got close to it, it was a different color. All these weird things. To me, the weirder the better, because if somebody was just making up a BS story, they want it to sound rational. So you don't come up with things like, well, I got in the craft, 5 minutes went by, I came out, and 2 hours had gone by. I mean, you're just not going to make that up. Then on the right-hand side of the piece of paper, I said, okay, we have Einstein's equations in general relativity, and we use them to talk about black hole mergers or neutron star mergers or whatever. And all these things are massively energetic events. Suppose I could engineer Einstein's equations the way we engineer Maxwell's equations for electromagnetic effects. What would I expect to see? And I find out I got a hand-in-glove match between what was claiming to be observed and what Einstein's equation, if you could engineer them, Well, why can't we
What
engineer them?
are you, madman?
What we know today is the energy density required to engineer those equations is just way beyond our ability to do so. So,
Can you give me a comparison to what the energy requirements or something like that would be like?
yeah, people have in fact, Alcubierre warp drive. I don't know if you've heard of that, but Miguel Alcubierre was a researcher in general relativity and kind of a Star Trek fan and so on. He said, I wonder if we could really have warp drive. And so he used Einstein's equations to say, okay, under what conditions could we do a warp drive? And he actually came up with solutions from out of the equations. Okay, what would it take to drive that? Oh, it would be hundreds of times more than the energy of the sun. I mean, just out of sight energy. So, until we have a new energy source or until there's some backdoor that we haven't, zeroed in on, it's just really outside of our expertise to think of
But
engineering.
there could be conceivably some breakthrough in an understanding of this backdoor, like whatever it could
That's right.
be, some new type of science, some new kind of understanding.
And one of the things that I've looked into myself is, well, what about vacuum energy, so-called? As a quantum physicist, we all know that, you push a kid in a swing and it comes down and stops. But at the quantum level, you get something going, it doesn't stop. It always comes down to a certain level and it's still there. So it turns out that what we call empty space is not really empty, it's full of quantum fluctuations. And in fact, one of the difficulties of modern physics theory is that when we go, by using our standard quantum theory, to calculate, well, what's the energy density, like right here, or way out in empty space? What's the energy density of those quantum fluctuations? It's 120 orders of magnitude greater than could possibly be according to all of our other theories. With collapsed gravity and everything else. So we have this conundrum that energy that is everywhere somehow all is random and cancels out. So, it's just not having an effect. So the idea is if you could somehow access that energy and cohere it, so to speak, maybe you could get to the energy. I mean,
What would that look like?
Well, if I go off on a weird tangent, I could tell you what it might look like. Along the way in the remote viewing program where we're kind of looking at physical effects, I decided to take a look at so-called levitating saints.
Okay.
And so, you'd think, okay, well, that's a Catholic church trying to pretend that it's got these magical people and whatever. But when you dig into the data, you find that isn't it. It's that the church hated the idea that some individuals were levitating because they might be in the middle of giving mass and suddenly they, float up or whatever. So it turns out that even looking in the deep literature of the Inquisition and so on, the evidence is really solid that there have been levitating saints. And what the Catholic Church usually did is they squirreled them off into some monastery where nobody'd see them because they're
When
so.
you say levitating, like what do you mean? You mean like how
I mean-
far off the ground?
Sometimes.
Jamie's got something here. Notable example happened during a visit to Italy from the Spanish ambassador. The ambassador had visited Joseph in his monastic cell and was so impressed that he wanted to return with his wife. Joseph entered the church where the couple hoped to meet him, and upon seeing the statue of Mary, elevated 10 feet into the air, flew over the crowd to the statue, prayed, flew back to the door, and returned home. The church later took depositions from a number of people who were there that day, and their stories were consistent. And what year was this?
Yeah.
1628.
1628. So there are enough stories like that with lots of observers and the reporting under really excellent conditions. Okay. Now, that guy didn't have a nuclear power pack on his back. So how did that happen? Well, the only thing I can think of in terms of the physics we know today would be that somehow the vacuum energy, which can be very high if you cohered it, and if you made it non-random, maybe that could do it.
So perhaps he was able to access this with states of consciousness because he was so devout in his faith that
That's
upon
right.
seeing this, the experience was so overwhelming that he was somehow able to access this energy.
Right, and that ecstatic state is.
But it would take this extreme belief, this extreme commitment, this state of mind that's very rare.
Exactly. That's what it would take.
And you would follow that when you did the experiments with the quantum chip. You'd say, well, if someone's able to control oscillations, you're doing something with your mind that shouldn't be possible.
Right.
And you're affecting a physical thing that shouldn't be possible. And this is just someone who'd never thought of doing that before, someone who didn't know that they were going. This is a physical manifestation of
Physical
the
manifestation, yes.
power of whatever unknown
Right.
ability of the human mind.
So since it's unknown, there's no way we would know how to tap it.
Right, and if these are very unique moments where this is an extremely devout person who obviously was a monk, was probably meditating and achieving this insane state of consciousness that's almost impossible to get to unless you're committed as long as he was, unless you're as dedicated as he was, and then he has this overwhelming moment.
Right. And I have no way to, connect the physics to it. Now,
But the idea is that if there is energy that's allowing a person using their mind to do this, that somehow or another, if this energy could be accessed through science, through
that's
physics,
right.
through engineering.
We tried to look into that. For example, Andrei Sakharov, a very famous Soviet physicist, said, I don't think gravity is its own thing. I think really it's a manifestation of the underlying quantum fluctuations. And so I and some colleagues from Lockheed Martin and elsewhere kind of looked into that option. And, if we're just sitting here talking and so on, the universe is full of quantum fluctuations. Why don't I notice it? On the other hand, if you get into your fast-moving car and you suddenly take off, you're pressed back in your seat. Well, what is it that's pressing you back? I mean, it isn't the wind. You've got a windshield and a cover. Well, there's some modeling that says, well, maybe it's because if you try to accelerate through the vacuum fluctuations, it will push back on you. So that might be our first little touch that, okay, under conditions of acceleration, we do notice the background vacuum fluctuations. Well, since to a theorist, inertia and gravity are, connected somehow, then it makes you think, okay, well, maybe there's some way of accessing vacuum fluctuations to control gravity. That's what we would like to think. And so one of the things we did in the program was just collect every bit of data that we could. So, for example, when I went through my analysis of, well, if we could engineer general relativity, what we'd expect to see, a number of things came out of it. So, for example, in this room, most of the electromagnetic energy we don't see. It's in the form of heat. And we don't see heat. If you get an infrared detector, you can see it, but we don't see heat. Well, it turns out that under the conditions in which you're controlling gravity, the way these craft appear to be doing, one of the consequences and one of the attributes that goes along with it is that frequencies get raised. And so the heat of a craft that you ordinarily wouldn't see can get raised up into the visible spectrum. And so that's why they might look so bright. That also has certain other additional consequences. That is, if it's powered up and it's sitting there in the ground and you get too close, the ordinary heat spectrum, which isn't harmful, or the visible spectrum, which isn't harmful, can be shifted up frequency into the ultraviolet and soft X-ray. So if you get too close to a landing craft that's powered up, you might get a sunburn, which is one of the things that has been reported. Or you might actually, in fact, get radiation poisoning from X-rays and so on. So those kinds of things seem to go hand in hand and give us some clues of where to look.
What is your take on the Travis Walton story?
I think the Travis Walton story is right on. I think that's a solid story.
It's a
I
very.
don't have any
I have a
specific.
bobblehead. It's a Travis Walton bobblehead.
Oh yes, okay.
That's him. He gave it to me.
I see.
Pretty cool.
Okay, no, I think I all aspects that I've seen of his story, I take that as.
For people that don't know the story, I'll give you a brief synopsis or a brief breakdown of what it was. They're loggers. They're driving through Arizona. They see this craft moving through the sky, and it goes into the woods. Travis gets out of the truck, runs towards it, gets too close to it, and is hit with some sort of a beam. Flies back, falls down. The other guys panic. They take off in the truck, and as they're taking off, they're arguing that they need to go back and get him. We need to go help him. We need to go back and get him. They're all freaked out. They decide, we got to go back. So they turn around, and he's gone. They get back to the spot. The craft is gone. Travis is gone. They reported. Everyone's freaking out. No one knows. They suspect they might have killed him or something. 5 days later, Travis appears wearing the same clothes, looking none the worse for wear, with this fantastic story that they took him aboard this craft, and they communicated with him and fixed his body. That something happened to him upon the impact of whatever that ray was that hit him, and he was going to die. They repaired him, and they communicated with him and brought him back. 5 days later, he has the story. And he's had the same story for decades.
And one of the reasons I accept that story is that, for example, the other people who left the site and then went back, they eventually did polygraphs on them, and they passed the polygraphs. I mean, they weren't making up that story.
Polygraphs are manipulatable. You can manipulate.
Well, yeah, you can, but would I expect that some
unsophisticated
loggers would do
no.
it?
Particularly one of the guys
yeah.
didn't even like Travis. One of the guys, Travis, got into a fist fight with the actual day of the event.
Oh, my.
Yeah, and he also told the exact same story.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
so there was a lot going on with that one. And then there had been frequent sightings in that one particular area, which is also weird. Like, what is it about certain areas? I mean, there's the area that you discussed in Australia. Well, that would kind of make sense if there really is a base somewhere. And the real thought that keeps getting brought about in the zeitgeist is the ocean.
Yes.
That's what people bring up all the time. If you wanted to hide in plain sight, where would you hide? Well, you hide in 3/4 of the Earth's surface that we very rarely examine.
And the observation of UFOs coming up, or
Yeah.
non-human intelligence craft coming up out of the ocean, they're all over the place. And
Right.
so Tim Godelay, who's ex-Navy admiral, he's a Navy admiral now retired, who was in charge of NOAA, the National Oceanographic, whatever it's called. He's really big on the idea of collecting data about UFOs emerging from the water. And so it seems like the data on that is just all over the place. Also, observing UFOs in the water zooming by submarines
Right.
at
500
400 knots, 500
yeah.
knots, or
Yeah.
whatever, without any cavitation. I mean,
Right.
it's just really. So the data, we're buried in data, really. We're just not buried in how to explain it.
Have any of these remote viewers tried to look at the bottom of the ocean?
Not that I'm aware of.
Why wouldn't they
Now,
do
remote
that?
viewers have zeroed in on UFOs, although it turns out not at the bottom of the ocean. Let me give you an example. But we should probably do that. I mean, since now these days I'm not involved in remote viewing programs, so maybe there are some.
But there are
who do
remote
that.
viewing programs that are still going on right now?
I would say that's likely. I mean, when you have an asset that works
Yeah.
to some degree,
Even though it's dismissed publicly.
even though it's dismissed publicly. So even after the SRI program got shut down, and after I came out to Austin in, '85 to set up EarthTech International and the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, starting to pursue my physics stuff because I really wanted to pursue my physics. I didn't want to stay in looking at remote viewing forever. But I got calls from certain intelligence
Shit.
agency asking me if I'd be willing to set up another program in remote viewing. And so I figured, okay, I turned them down because I liked the change I had made. But so if they ask me that, chances are they ask somebody else that, and they've probably got somebody to agree to do it. And from time to time, many of the remote viewers that we trained in Army INSCOM, for example, have now retired from the Army, and they're teaching remote viewing
What the
classes.
actual fuck?
And they often get tasked by somebody back in the intelligence community to check out something. I mean, they've been very prolific in, for example, detecting, say, cargo ships coming across the ocean where a certain container is full of dope.
Really?
That's been released on the CIA site about remote viewing results, and so you can find it. Of course, I tell any remote viewers I know, don't want to advertise that because you don't want cartels
Yeah, right.
putting a check on your back. So
Yeah, but what I'm interested in is the possibility of things under the ocean, and I would imagine if I was running a remote viewing program and I had suspicions that there's activity under the ocean, like that craft that was seen that goes 500 knots under
Mhm.
the water, that I would start looking under there.
I can well imagine that somebody is.
But you're just not aware of
I'm just
anything.
not aware of it. But
There's this structure that exists off the coast of California at the bottom of the ocean that looks odd, very odd. It looks very constructed. It looks man-made or intelligent in its construction. And I was just looking at something on Google Earth the other day where people are having a hard time finding it now. And they're thinking that it's perhaps obscured.
obscure, yeah.
See if you can find that, because
saw that
I know
too,
what you're
I can't
talking
remember
about.
what
You saw it as well?
I saw it as well, and it was certainly interesting.
it looked
So-
very weird. It looked like some sort of a base. It was flat on the top, and it looked like it had openings in it.
Let's see, I lost your sound. Is there?
Oh, you did? Jamie, maybe it's your headphones, or did you step on something? You hear me now?
No, I mean I just hear
We'll
you
take
through
it.
the air, but not.
Listen, we're going to take a break right now because I got to use the restroom anyway, and Jamie will fix it, and we'll be right back. Had a little tactical snafu, use the restroom, and we're back. So I forget exactly where we're at, but I know where I wanted to go. Where I wanted to go is we're talking about potential sources of energy, potential sources of propulsion systems. How much do you consider the possibility that the things that people are seeing are ours? They're made in some top secret program using some advanced propulsion system, some advanced energy system that is not publicly disclosed.
I wouldn't rule out the fact that we may have some pretty fancy things running from our own labs. I know that what gets developed in the dark labs, some of which I know about, are really advanced, but it just can't cover the whole observation that we're seeing with what we call NHI craft, non-human intelligence craft.
But do you think that some of this stuff has been back engineered from these non-human crafts?
Some of the materials, I would say yes. I think we've got some. It's out on the web these days. That, for example, Battelle Institute has supposedly were given some materials from the Roswell crash, and we always hear the descriptions of this foil that you could crumple up and then you let go and it just flattens out again and so on. So material of that type was provided to Battelle, and they worked on it for some years to try to see if they could reproduce it. And the claim is that, and it's in the public domain, that nitinol came out of it, which is that material that can be heated and then it'll reform into its original sorts. It doesn't exactly reproduce the effect you saw, but some of it is kind of in the direction of that. And it turned out that some of the main material engineers that worked on that, at their deathbed, they told their relatives that they were working on pieces from the Roswell crash, and they made some progress, but not a lot. You can look that up on the internet and see that that's the case.
Is part of the limitation this thing that we were discussing earlier about compartmentalization and the lack of ability of other scientists to get access to this material so they can collaborate?
Yes, the compartmentalization, I would say, is the biggest impediment to making really good progress. For sure, I think that's the case.
And this conundrum has sort of existed for quite a long time.
Quite a long time.
This is something
decades.
This is also in line with what Bob Lazar said. Bob Lazar said the big frustration when he was working, he was tasked with trying to figure out the propulsion system, but he had no access to the metallurgists. He had no access to anyone else that was also working on similar things. And he's like, science just can't progress this way. It needs to be collaborative.
Absolutely right. That's 100%. And it's even worse than you would think. I mean, one of the stories that I ran into was a corporation had materials from crashes in their basement. They couldn't even bring them up to the top floor for their own scientists to look at because it was so compartmentalized. And so that was part of the deal where we said, okay, well, give them to us, and then we'll come in the front door and give them to your scientists. And we won't say it came from your basement, and we won't say what it had to do with. And, maybe that would work. But that got shut down, so it was so compartmentalized. So compartmentalization is really a death knell on much of this stuff. As I go back to my Teller story, more collaboration, even though there are faults that can happen and material can leak out, and information can leak out, and that might help an adversary. Still, I think more openness would be a better idea.
Oh, for sure. Well, definitely for you and I who are fascinated by this thing.
Right.
What have you had a personal experience with anything that you can't explain?
No, actually, haven't.
So for you, it's
I mean, one time I saw what appeared to be a satellite make a right angle turn, so that falls into that kind of a category. But who knows? Who knows what it was?
Right.
So no, I haven't.
Nothing profound.
Nothing profound.
So
no.
you've never been hopped in a jet and flown to the wreckage and had a chance to look at things?
No, haven't.
God, don't you want to?
Well, I sure would like to do that. But
Yeah.
that's still. We had this discussion earlier about well, for example, in the remote viewing or quantum entanglement or what's going on that in our physics that we don't understand. That these kinds of things can be happening, and you'll be interested to know that someone John Paul DeGioia, and I are in partnership to explore a new means of communication, quantum communications. And so I'm actually now, at this point, directly involved in a program to examine quantum communications. And so it turns out that whereas ordinary electromagnetic communications, can't get through barriers, metal door or whatever. Well, why is that? It's because the electromagnetic signal, when it gets to the metal door, the electric and magnetic field generate counteracting effects, and so the signal can't get through. So it turned out that some years ago, when I was digging around to try to find out how to explain unusual effects, I dug deeper into electromagnetism down into the quantum levels and recognized that there are some additional quantum processes where you could end up suppressing the electric and magnetic fields, but you would still have a quantum signal, which in principle could get through barriers. And so that would mean, okay, if that's the case, and you could communicate to submarines. So whereas the salt water is sufficiently conductive, the electromagnetic signal can't get down there and communicate. If you are able to pull out the electric and magnetic components, but you still have an underlying quantum aspect to it, you could get through. Or same thing with, spaceships. When our spaceships came back when the Apollo spaceships came back, once they started in our atmosphere and are surrounded by plasma, we had this period where there's no communication. Well, for the very reason that electromagnetic signals can't get through charged plasmas. But this quantum communication aspect could.
What would you use how would you encode the information quantumly, and how would you project it? What kind of machinery would be involved in something like that?
Well, it turns out that the machinery to generate the signals would be very explicitly designed antenna structures that are put together in such a way as to prevent electromagnetic components from being transmitted. It's the detection part where the secret to the technology is, because it turns out that, okay, if electromagnetic signals aren't there, how are you going to detect such a signal? Because all of our detectors are, electromagnetic signal comes in and generates a current and whatever. Well, it turns out that these special kinds of signaling at the quantum level can only be detected by quantum devices. Quantum devices can detect these quantum communication signals, even if there's no electric and magnetic effects associated with them. So that's what we're looking at. And so when I think about what areas does this have application for? Well, of course, it's got a lot of application for things like communication and under conditions where you'd like to overcome shielding. But it may have something to do even with some of the consciousness stuff. Because ordinarily, when you hear about people trying to think, well, what about consciousness? Is it still just all molecules and neurons whirling around, or are there some additional fields? There are a couple of physicists, a physicist and an anesthesiologist. The physicist Roger Penrose, he got a Nobel Prize for general relativity stuff, and Stu Hameroff, who is an anesthesiologist. They coupled up and started saying, okay, is there a possibility that there are quantum aspects in ordinary life, in ordinary consciousness? Because it sounds kind of reasonable. The anesthesiologist says, well, when I give somebody a certain anesthetic, they lose consciousness. So there must be something about the anesthesia that grabs onto whatever's responsible for consciousness. So make long story short, they came up with a model where they felt that there are, in fact, quantum processes occurring within the brain. That in addition to the stuff we all read about and know about, like neurons and all that kind of stuff, there's also a distribution throughout our brain and nervous system of what's called microtubules. And it turns out microtubules have such a structure, you do experiments in the lab to show this, that they can detect quantum signals. So the idea that even in our consciousness there are mechanisms for detecting quantum signals is like a whole new area to investigate. And so there are some, biological and consciousness-oriented experimenters that are taking a look at this idea that, okay, instead of just saying quantum entanglement, that's how information you can get from here to there, maybe we can actually find out, okay, well, what's the mechanism, though? And so this is a whole new area. It turns out that I developed proof of principle for this sub-rosa quantum communication stuff on a classified contract back in the 90s, actually. So I got proof of principle in that situation. However, you say, okay, well, if you got proof of principle, then why aren't we using it? Why isn't it all over the place? Well, it turned out that quantum detectors were very, new kinds of circuitry and nothing ready for prime time. So I put that whole thing on the shelf, let it sit there for a while. And now, because of quantum computing, it turns out a lot of research effort is going to develop cryogenic circuitry near absolute zero to be used in quantum computing. So I said, okay, they got these Josephson junctions working, which is exactly what I want to use for my detection scheme. And so if I find time, I decided to take it off the shelf. So I approached JP and showed him what the potential was, not only in just communications, but maybe it has implications for, biological things or medical things or whatever because of this other work on microtubules. So he said, okay, well, let's go for it. So we have another major lab that is actually putting together circuitry for us that operates about 3.7 degrees above absolute zero. I mean, this is really quite a technical challenge. But he and I are working on that together. He's my collaborator.
Fascinating. Quantum entanglement, is that what you think was going on with the algae? So if you were able to do something to the algae in one area, this same colony of algae, when you had separated by long distances, they instantaneously recognized that something was happening?
That's the only thing I can imagine at this point based on the physics that we know.
How far were they separated in distance?
Well, I was going to separate it was about 5 miles. As it turns out, I never actually got to do that experiment because the CIA came and scooped me up and said, well, we got to look at this remote viewing. And so even though I proposed doing the experiment, the polygraph said that guys said this would be a great experiment. Never got around to doing the experiment because along the way, Ingo Swann, visited his lab, came out and perturbed the tiny quantum chip in the super shielded environment. that brought the CIA on my doorstep, and so then we went off in that direction. So I never got to do the experiment.
So as you consider all these technologies, as these innovations occur and technology becomes more and more powerful, like quantum computing, like many of these things that we're seeing now, do you think that these are all steps to further understand how these crafts could possibly work, and we're getting closer and closer to it, where disclosure would accelerate that, and we would have to get over this. We'd have to have some sort of amnesty towards the people that
Right.
that misappropriated funds and lied to Congress, amnesty towards whatever defense contractors were given access to this equipment or these materials and other ones. There has to be some executive decision that's made where, like, look, for the greater good of the human race, we have to bypass all these blockades that are involved in us being able to truly understand what's going on here. And one of them is we have to have disclosure.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, we're not alone in thinking that way, as many in the field are aware of. In 2023, then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and a Republican Senator Rounds got together, and they put together an outline of an amendment to be attached to the National Defense Authorization Act called UAP Disclosure Act 2023, and it's pages and pages long. And it's hard to believe,
I don't trust
but
that shit.
within this document, they outline how you would go through disclosure, and it's very detailed. I mean, for example, this is an official government document. You can go find it on the internet. Non-human intelligence phrase is mentioned more than 20 times.
Whoa.
And the document said, look, what we need is a presidential panel, officiated panel of people from several different areas who, and all those people out there who have materials and so on, we're going to practice eminent domain, which turns out to be one of the things that turns people's hair on fire when they think they've got something and don't want to share it. But anyway, that we have to come up with a process whereby corporations that have been involved in this can begin to share their history and their data and their materials. And the National Archives will be set up to make this information available as is safe to do, considering security concerns. And so this is a multi-page document that you can find. You can find it on the internet. Okay. It passed the Senate, but the House killed it. So you might think, okay, well, that's the end of that. Surprisingly so, and it makes you realize the intensity of this, after it was killed, both Schumer and Rounds got back up in the Senate floor and said, okay, it got killed, but we're not giving up. We're going to get it in there next year. And so the following year, 2024, they included it again. And most of it got killed. The only thing that got killed was, okay, the National Archives will make available whatever information is provided them on this subject area. And the National Archives has started to do that. But as you can imagine, anybody who's got some really juicy stuff isn't going to give it to the National Archives. So it's still dead in the water. So anyway, recently I was asked to come in and brief Senator Rounds, who was one of the two people who pushed this. And he said, we're not giving up on this. Give me what you found so far about the physics of this. Because when we try to push it, we always get the pushback that, well, we're not going to make any headway. The pilots say this is way beyond our physics, but I understand that you and your colleagues have worked on this and felt that you can provide some of the physics. We may not get the engineering yet, but we have some place to start. Is that true? Because I need to push back on the pushback. So I gave him a long lecture on the physics, which I've also presented to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the Senate Armed Services Committee, ARROW, the Old Domain Anomalies Resolution Office. So the information is coming out into those places, and so though there are those people in high positions of power in our Congress who are really pushing it. So, for example, as it turns out, tomorrow there's going to be a big meeting. I think it was set up by Representative Luna, I think it's Representative Luna. When they put out that official document saying, okay, JFK files are coming out, RFK files are coming out, MLK files are coming out. In that list, UFO files are coming out. Well, they haven't gotten there. The Epstein files are coming out. Okay. So it's officially on that list. And so, in fact, as it turns out, tomorrow there's going to be a big thing in Congress where they're going to have an open hearing with people coming forward to talk about that there should be some steps forward to release this kind of data. So it is not a dead issue. I mean, it is hot, and there are a lot of really powerful people behind it. But you've got the resistance buried. I mean, there are people within the intelligence community and the DoD who do think we need more openness. They see the same issues I see, that we're not making much progress because everything is so compartmentalized.
Right.
So
Is there a
it's an
concern?
ongoing thing.
When you talked about during the Bush administration, you were tasked along with others to try to figure out what are the pros and what are the cons and what outweighs what. And your group decided that the cons outweighed the pros. When it comes to disclosure today, with the risk of espionage and with the risk of this information, if it becomes disclosed and everybody has access to it, clearly, if it's disclosed to the general public, it's also going to be disclosed to our enemies.
Right.
And so this becomes an issue of national security.
Yes. So it's got to be done correctly.
How would one do that?
Well, this write-up that Schumer and Rounds and some other people, Gillibrand and Rubio, put together, said, okay, we're going to have to lay everything out on the table in a highly classified area. We're going to have to sort our way through of what can be released that doesn't take the chance of giving our potential adversaries data they need to leap ahead of us. But nonetheless, we've got to have more collaboration so that we can move ahead faster. So that's the job of, at least in that document, of a 9-person panel to figure out, okay, what could be released without jeopardizing our national security so much, but nonetheless accelerating the kind of collaboration we need to make headway faster.
And then there's the issue of when it does get disclosed, like what happens to the general public's perception? If this is like a national disclosure, if Trump gets on television and discloses everything we know so far, we are in possession of 10 vehicles, however you want to call them,
Right.
of non-human intelligence that are not ours. We have been working on this for decades in secrecy, but because of the fact that everything has been so secret and everything's so compartmentalized, innovation has been stagnant. Our understanding of it has been stagnant. The only way forward is to disclose, but this is going to come with a radical reimagining of our place in the universe.
What you've just described is what I think has to happen. I mean, because you have whistleblowers like Dave Grush coming forward, and he basically says, we've got craft, we've got bodies, we've got aerospace corporations working on this behind the scenes. But in the end, that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't really solve the problem. And you have people come forward and said, look, I can give you the address of where the stuff is stored, so we can take this out of the discussion area and really prove something. But it would take, I think, a presidential executive order or something to light a fire under that process to have it happen. So,
But that's all possible.
it's all possible. And when I compare, where are we today as compared to where we were in 2004 or whenever that other discussion took place, at that time there was a lot of stigma. There was no proof you could kind of put your hands on. There was, in fact, purposely designed misinformation by the intelligence community. So-called Robertson panel went out of their way to, say this is all nonsense. So that was something you're dealing with. So there you realize, well, if I come forward and say there's really something to this, I'm really blasting through quite a brick wall here. But in the intervening decades, I think we've gotten to a point where the reasons we had to not do it then are no longer applicable. But some of the concerns we had discussed then are still applicable and we have to pay attention to them. So I think, for example, this film that you saw that had its premiere at the South by Southwest that Dan Farrow put out, and an upcoming book coming out by Jay Stratton, who was in charge of the UAP task force, these kind of things are going to accelerate that option. And so I think it's only a matter, I would find it difficult to believe that within a decade we're not going to figure out how to do this, and that there will be what you and I would call disclosure, but in a responsible way where we're not providing the enemy information they need. I recall when the DoD program was set up out of DIA, they said, well, we need to investigate this to find out whose craft there are, how do they run and whatever. And then the second reason was, what if our potential adversaries get access or figure this out from their data collection before we do, and they leap ahead of us? So it turned out that whole program was not based on one. They couldn't care less where these things were coming from, what their intentions were. They were really worried about the possibility of an adversary getting ahead of us. So that was the driving force behind the whole program. Well, now having all these intervening years go by, and there hasn't been any obvious super breakthrough by adversaries, I think now's the time we We could have a kind of a reconciliation process, make sure we don't put everybody in jail that had anything to do with covering this up, provide proper lanes to bring various aspects of information forward. And so that's what I and colleagues that I interact with are trying to do today.
I would also think that if I was looking at civilization, particularly United States civilization, and thinking what kind of an impact would things have in 2004 with disclosure, and what kind of an impact would they have in 2025, I think that this gradual acceptance and this understanding that this is probably a real phenomenon is much more widespread today. So
Yes.
the concept of it wouldn't be as shocking as it would have been 2 decades ago. 2 decades ago, by the way, is when the Tic Tac vehicle was observed, which is
2004, yeah.
which is really kind of crazy when you think about the technology that was required to do something, and then imagine that technology being ours in 2004. It seems preposterous.
Right.
It seems almost outside of the realm of even whatever top secret programs could have been running. Some black programs could have been running. That seems too much.
It is too much,
It
yeah.
seems too crazy. So, I think a big breakthrough, and I think you probably agree with the New York Times, that 2017 report in the New York Times was huge, because here it is in the most prestigious newspaper in the United States, in the world, right? And it's saying, look, there's real things happening here, and there's real people who are at a very high level who are talking about these things, whether it's Commander Fravor or Ryan Graves or all these different fighter pilots that have encountered these things that are just doing something that is beyond explanation. This is more in the zeitgeist now.
Yes,
There's
yes.
And the more you have people like James Fox and Jeremy Corbell and these documentaries that get out, more and more of an understanding and appreciation of the fact that these aren't kooks. These are real people, and we need to take into consideration the very obvious possibility that we are not unique. There's too many planets, there's too many solar systems, there's too many galaxies, and then dimensions.
Yes.
And then just the potential of, like, what do we look like in a million years? What
Right.
do we look like in a million years? And if we, existed in this form for hundreds of thousands of years, it's not inconceivable that a species like us could keep going with its innovative trajectory
Yes.
and achieve some state a million years from now that is just beyond our imagination currently, and that we might be experiencing that.
Right. I think you have laid out an exact map of the real situation and what the future probably holds for us, and the fact that now's the time, sooner rather than later, to begin to have this become part of our total philosophical fabric, to face into this and to accept the reality of non-human intelligences, for example, and recognize that our own technical development is moving so fast that the kind of things that we find to be so mysterious are pretty much likely in our not that far off future.
Well, just what we see
Yeah.
with the leaps that quantum computing
Exactly.
is able to achieve. Equations that would take standard computing billions of years could do it in 4 minutes.
Exactly. That's right.
Just you hear that and you go, what are you even saying?
That's right. In fact, my son this morning brought up that article, and it's kind of unbelievable. So
It's unbelievable and it's real.
it's unbelievable and it's real.
And it's happening right now. And then just imagine taking that 50 years.
Yes.
50
right.
years ago, that was science fiction.
That's
Complete
right,
science
that's
fiction.
right. I mean, I love my example of, in fact, I got it into the New York Times article. Suppose you gave Leonardo da Vinci a garage door opener. What could he do? Well,
Right.
first of all, plastic. He don't know what plastic is. Secondly, when he opens it up and sees all these little tiny things, he'd never heard of electromagnetism. I mean, there's no way that or give Einstein an iPhone back in 1945 or something,
Right.
What could he do with it? So that's sort of the position that we kind of have been in, to see these craft that we get access to either through crashes or, quote, donations. And, it's really mysterious, but nonetheless, we should do our best. And these days, because of the development of quantum technologies and so on, we have better tools. We have AI on our side to move fast through some calculations and stuff. So I think this is the time where disclosure is going to happen, and relatively soon.
Well, if it does happen, it's thanks to people like you that stuck their neck out for many, many years. And I'm sure you experienced a lot of ridicule and side eyes.
Sure did, right? In fact, I remember when I was involved in the remote viewing program, one of my sons was attending a grammar school, and one day another father's kid came over to play with him. And when the other professor, actually at Stanford, came over and said, I brought my kid over to play with you, but his last name is Putoff. Are you associated with that Putoff at SRI and that remote viewing? I said, yeah, I am. And he said, okay, my son's not going to come over and play with you
Oh,
kid
boy.
anymore. So
Oh,
you
what
run
a
into
fool.
that.
What a
you run
fool.
into that. But I don't know, some people
Why
just
would he
have-
want to talk to you? If that was my kid, I'd be like, let's hang out.
Yeah, really.
Tell me, Al, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah, so anyway, that's what we used to run into.
Closed-mindedness.
But that shows how things have changed.
Right.
In general, when we talk about the remote viewing aspects, people just say, okay, I accept that. Now, how can we apply it? And we talk about technologies associated with crash retrievals. Okay, fine, but what can we learn from that? How can we apply it? So, I mean, it's a different world we're in now, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm not going to stop.
Well, I'm very happy you're out there. I
fuck?
really, really appreciate you, and I really
I
appreciate
hate
your
when
time.
I
So
be
thank you for coming in here and talking to us.
Certainly welcome, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to be pursuing these frontier areas and bringing them to a large audience. That's a real gift. I really appreciate that.
Well, it feels like a gift for me because it's so fascinating, and I've been obsessed with it my whole life, as I think a lot of people are who
Yeah.
look into it at all and realize there's something of substance there.
Right.
Well, thank you, Hal. Thank
Okay,
you. It
well,
was a real
you,
pleasure.
Joe. Pleasure for me too.
All right. Bye, everybody.
That's normal, really. Beyond normal.
Let's go!
There was an Elden Ring trailer, like a new big summarization Elden Ring trailer. Night Rain overview trailer. All right, I'll shut up. I will shut up. So yeah, just my thoughts. Really quick as we preface this trailer. Wasn't super into it in the first couple of sessions. I was kind of like, it's okay. But then it finally clicks. So it's one of those games where it needs about an hour. Yeah, and we had some pretty fun matches towards the end of it. And I was like, ooh, I'm actually enjoying playing different classes and shit. Ooh, wait, this is kind of addictive. This is kind of fun. With that being said, let's fire up this thing and check it out. Oh, it's looking purty, too.
Elden Ring Night Rain is a co-op survival action game where you navigate a vast and dangerous field with other players.
Keep forgetting that it's 3 players. Damn.
You must become one of the Nightfarers, fighting through the endless night and taking on scores of vicious foes over the span of 3 days.
Bro, I'm a streamer.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Let's go. Jose, my man.
I cannot believe I'm here.
I can't believe you're here either.
I'm so happy, Joe. I remember when, people began telling me, hey, Joe Rogan, and I was like, oh, Joe Rogan, what? Because I'm always lost, right? Yeah, Joe Rogan loves Bazaar.
Yes.
Loves Bazaar in Las Vegas.
It's my favorite restaurant in Vegas.
Loves Bazaar meet in Las Vegas. And I'm like, really? Shit. And you're happy every time you listen that anybody likes your restaurant.
Well, your restaurant is set up so good. When you walk in, those Argentine grills are going with the live wood fires. Oh, and you smell the steaks right when you walk in. Oh, it's perfect honeypot. Because if you're not hungry, you get hungry the moment you walk in the door.
So Bazaar, I opened first one, oh my God, over 15 years ago in LA, in this hotel, amazing hotel, SLS, by Philippe Stark. Sam Nazarian was the brains behind the whole project. And the restaurant just became, wow, big hit in LA. It was a crazy place. It was like Alice in Wonderland, like Joe in Wonderland. But then when we were opening SLS, the same hotel in Vegas, we were like, let's do Bazaar, but something else. And obviously what everybody loves in Vegas is a meat place. So we got the spirit of the original Bazaar, same dishes, the whimsy, the cotton candy foie gras, the Philly cheesesteak that you eat in one bite, but we brought meats from different parts of the United States, different parts of Spain, Europe, Iberico pork, big grills, and was kind of fancy. You could go fancy. You could go cotton candy and cones of caviar, which, by the way, I have here some cones if you're hungry later. But then you can go and you eat a steak. That's it.
Why is Vegas a big meat place?
It feels like it's a lot of steakhouses.
A lot of steakhouses, yeah. Not a lot of great ones, though.
A lot of women. Overall, it's good. I'm not going to be the one saying.
There's a few that
you can. I'm not going to be the one.
There's a couple of good ones.
I'm not going to be. I mean, listen, it's great chef. My friend Tom Colicchio has one.
What's that one?
I don't even know. There's so many casinos. I don't know. But Tom Colicchio, the chef. Wow, you know everything.
Yeah, that's the one we've been to at MGM.
Oh, that one's great.
Yeah.
That one's
Tom,
great.
and Tom is a great guy.
Great. What is it called? Craft steak? Is it
Craft?
steak?
It's a craft one. I think Wolfgang Pack has another one. Anyway, it's many other ones with names, with chefs behind, with no chefs.
Yeah.
Big name chefs.
I
no
like
name.
Cleaver is great. It's
Ah,
off the
yeah, I've
strip.
not been.
That's
I
very
should go.
good. Very good.
Yeah, people. This is good you mentioned that because when we go Vegas, we stay in the casinos and we go to the casinos, hotels, and that's it.
Yeah.
And me, I've always been a big fan of saying it's okay, but make the effort to leave the casino.
Yes.
Leave the strip and also visit some of the other restaurants.
Yeah, you gotta travel a little bit.
Because they deserve that we visit them too. Vegas is the casinos, but Vegas, like every other city in America, every other city in the world, is so much more.
Right.
We all go to the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, here we go. That's it. Nothing else. No, go beyond the obvious.
Yeah.
And you're going to discover great things. But Bazaar, I'm moving Bazaar.
Where?
To the Venetian.
Oh. Well, that other casino's going to starve then. They're going to fall apart.
No,
That's the only reason why I went
it's a
there.
good casino. It's a good casino, and they do a good job. The Sahar and the owner is a good guy, and we need to.
I'm sure.
And they're going to put a great concept there too. And
are they gonna replace
I don't
Bazaar
know
with?
yet. They didn't announce. If I can, I will help them. I've been helping them, but I'm moving
To the Venetian.
Bazaar meet to the Venetian.
And when is that going to happen?
At the end of this year.
Okay.
Soon. You'll be there.
I'll be prepared.
You'll be invited.
I'm going to come.
You'll
for
be
sure.
invited?
It's my favorite place to go in Vegas.
I'm very happy because it's almost, I don't know if it's the same as when a player moves to a new NBA team. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work.
No, Bazaar meets, it'll work.
But
It'll work.
it's that feeling, right? It's like I'm going to this new casino. It's great, closer to my other restaurants at the Cosmopolitan.
Mm-hmm.
I can go walking from one to each other, and
Well, that's nice.
better for me.
Yeah.
And then I have the other Bazaar, which is Bazaar. Man, I'm sorry, it sounds like a commercial, but
No.
restaurants are like my babies.
I've eaten at your place in Chicago as well.
Yeah, the Bazaar meet in Chicago and Bazaar
That was
Mar is great.
excellent. Excellent.
So Bazaar, it's kind of, again, restaurants for me, they've never been business. God knows I'm not the best businessman. I'm surrounded by good business people.
Well, I think that's
am a
why they're
creative
so
guy.
good, though. I think that's why they're so good. I think if you were just concentrating on making money, it wouldn't.
Well,
be
I
what
should.
it
I
is.
should. It's
You
not-
shouldn't. You keep doing what you're doing.
It's not a bad thing, but I am well, you are a storyteller, yo. You are a storyteller.
Yes.
You are a troubadour, a medieval troubadour that will tell the stories of what was happening around the castles and courts in medieval times.
Fuck,
You're a storyteller,
I'm
right?
not in the mood today. Maybe
I am
I'm
not
bad
very
luck
good at
today.
anything. My English, I miss a lot of words that I wish I knew. So
yeah,
I
but
could,
it sounds cool.
I could express myself better.
No.
But I'm a
It's
storyteller,
perfect.
and I tell stories through dishes. That's who I am.
Yeah. Well, you do a fantastic job of that, and the passion that you have for food comes through. It comes through in your restaurants. It really does. Like, you can tell the difference between someone who just really loves food and someone who's just trying to make money. So it's good that you're not a good businessman and that you surround yourself with good businessmen, because that's all you need. Good businessmen that you can trust, and then you concentrate on what you do best. That's a perfect marriage.
You know, I'm 55. I'm about to become 56. July 13th. I born in '69, and I realized not only as a chef, but as a person, as a man, as a father, as a husband, all the different labels we all have. It's always that the more you know, the more you realize you know nothing.
Right.
In the old days, I will be 23. Yeah, I know. Now it's like, I don't know. Tell me. And even if I know something in a conversation, I just tell, do you know about? I say, I don't. Why? Because I want to listen. Because I want to learn. I realized that me leaving home fairly early and not going to university and not even beginning first year of high school, I was out. I didn't even graduate on the first year. That one of the things I needed was receive education, but not in the traditional way. The traditional way was not for me. Just being there 8 hours a day listening to all the 100 kings we have in Spain growing up, like, why I need to know? And listen, and I respect kings, and I love the king of Spain. I think he's a great man, a great human being. It has nothing to do with that. It's only I didn't want to know about the other 200 kings we had in Spain in its history. It's not what I was interested.
Yeah.
I would be interested in knowing what they did. That was amazing, but not knowing about their names and their last names. I didn't
Right.
care about that. So I needed to find ways for me to use to learn. So that's why for me, I realized the more I know, the more I know nothing. And I'm in this moment, I'm 55, that I'm just eager to learn. I want to know more. I want to learn more. I'm talking now, but I want to listen more. I only want to be just a better person by learning.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. And when you're young, you think you know everything. And as you get older, there's a quote by, I think it's Dennis McKenna said this, that as the bonfire of enlightenment grows, the surface area of ignorance is exposed. So the more you learn, the more you realize there's so much you don't know. Whereas as you're young, you think, I figured it all out. And then as you get older, you're like, there's so much I don't know. Not only that, there's no way I can know everything. It's not possible. That's why fools argue about things that they don't know. Instead of just going, what is that? How does that work? Instead of actually being genuinely curious, fools like to try to pretend that they know more than they know. But it's not
bitches
possible to
go
breathe
for those
underwater.
kinds of
Don't
men.
pretend you can. It's not possible to know everything. You just can't. There's going to be people that know things that you don't know. Celebrate that. Enjoy it.
Women
I
don't
think
like
that's one of the
men
best things
that
that's ever happened to me through this podcast is I get to talk to so many different people that have lived so many different lives and have so many different passions and so many different interests and so many different things that they've studied. It's an amazing education. But I was a lot like you. I did not want to sit in school. Whatever ADHD is, I have it. Whatever the fuck it is.
I'm raising my hand.
I got it.
I mean, like sometimes when I have people, my son has this. I'm like, what? Your son is an amazing human, a smart individual.
Yeah.
And I feel like I connect with him because I think we are alike. So
Yeah.
I raise my hand. I am that
subscribe.
too.
I subscribe to the idea that ADHD is a superpower. I really do. Because I think the people that can't focus on nonsense, generally speaking, they can focus on things they love. Really focus. They get really excited about certain things. But everything else they can't be bothered with. Like when I was a kid, I remember being in math class and checking out. Because I said, wait a minute, can I do this on a calculator? Yes. There are calculators, right? And there's an unlimited supply of batteries, right? They said yes. I'm like, I'm out.
Screw this.
I'm out. I'm not going to think about math now because this is not something I'm interested in. If I can do all this math on a calculator, why do I need to learn how to do it? Now, obviously,